Hi, this is John from Natural Action, and today we're going to conduct an interview with Dr. Molly, who has a new book coming out, and it involves functional medicine and ways you can learn about taking care of yourself and keeping your body balanced and staying healthy. Hi, Dr. Molly, how are you
Thanks for
doing?
having me. I'm great.
Great to have you. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write a book.
I was at a meditation retreat and it just occurred to me that one of the things that I wanted to do more of was try to be of service to humanity. And I was really working with executives, investors, and entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley and these really amazing companies. And also, working as a Stanford lecturer, but I wasn't reaching as many people as I wanted. So I wanted to reach more people and give more people the knowledge that I've accumulated over the last 10 years or so, or my lifetime, really. And I figured, why not write a book to do that and kind of explain my philosophy of health to the world?
Very nice. And
Mm-hmm.
so explain for the listeners what type of medicine do you practice? We know you're very holistic and understand that, but if you could be more specific, what classification or direction are you heading with your philosophy that you want to share?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really good question because I don't feel strongly that I necessarily have one single form of medicine that I practice. I was trained in allopathic medicine, but I definitely use Chinese medicine and herbal medicine and naturopathic medicine and functional medicine and, um, you know, and even personalized medicine and precision medicine. So really what I care about is health span and whatever it takes to get a person to live longer and healthier is my goal. And so largely it's the philosophy of health based on understanding the body from the lens of first principles and thinking a lot about the energy paradigm versus the material paradigm. And, it really comes down to a few things that really matter, but one of the biggest ones is your energy, right? So when you eat food and you breathe air, you are burning that food that's been broken down into substrates into energy. And you're literally powering the electron transport chain, which is turning a hydrogen turbine, creating electrochemical gradient, and creating a capacitor and a battery. And so I got really interested in the sort of physics of health, um, and understanding like how does the body work from that lens. And that kind of leads us to the discussion around the importance of water. And, I've been really, really curious about water for a while. And part of the reason why I wanted to even do this interview with you was I wanted to even talk to you about your philosophy of health, because since I've installed your water filtration system in my home, I genuinely think my health has improved. And everybody who comes over and drinks the water is like, oh my God, this water is amazing. And it saves so much money. I don't have to buy bottled water. And it just tastes better than any other water I've ever used. So personally, I'm really curious on how you explain how this thing works and why it's so effective. But also I know that water matters because literally our bodies are mostly water and our mitochondria wouldn't function without hydrogen. And so, yeah, it just seems like a really interesting and important facet of our health. Hydration makes everything work better. And yeah, I would love to sort of chat with you about water today.
It was the common sense that this planet's water, life doesn't work without water. We just stepped over the most simple process.
Yeah.
And I I was watching vibrational mutations in the water. So right, and I'm
Yeah.
watching our normal vibration being mutated by water, and I was curious as to how and why water was mutating the vibration.
Water was mutating the vibration.
Yep.
So I now see the biology through the lens of frequency and energy and vibration, right? Every one of our atoms is mostly empty space, but we have this illusion of materialism, right? Like it's this illusion of matter. And what you're describing is something I don't think a lot of people understand, which is that when there's disharmony in the body, there's the potential for disease. Is that kind of what you're describing? Like when we drink the wrong water, it creates the wrong vibrational state of our cells.
However, in 2009, I would have never known that. I didn't know what I was studying. I was just
Yeah.
studying water was changing and it was getting better and it needed rest cycles. That's the first thing I learned, that it wasn't mutating correctly if I didn't let it rest. I was always into electricity. It's a very fundamental part of the universe.
Okay.
And so I started getting things that I never had answers for. And so water became my teacher in this sense. And what I discovered in the end, long story short, is that when the efficiencies were the highest and the water had quit mutating the vibrations, it taught principles that apply to any voltage, any current level.
Hmm.
And then so I started to realize, oh my goodness, this is the root of how water works in biology.
What do you mean by the water would get tired?
The human being learns and gets tired, so does the water. And then I was like, actually, the water's governing the whole biology of the human body. This is a gift and such a joy to learn about this. And then so I started studying the human body so I could make the correlations in the principle of behavior that we watch with voltages. Just like a
Okay.
cell might be 25 millivolts, 50 millivolts, maybe 100 millivolts. It's smaller voltages, but the principles are nonetheless the same. How it evolves, what's going on, we don't really know. That has to be studied, but we do know it learns. It gets tired when there's too much stress. And so you let it rest, and literally 24 hours
Wow.
is the ideal rest period, is what we found around. I think it was
That
more like,
is
yeah, it was
crazy.
crazy. It was crazy.
To even like think about water as like a living thing is like a bananas concept, right? Like nobody really sees it that way right now. But all you got to do is go look at a stagnant lake and see kind of dead water, you know? And anybody who's like drank old water bottles, sat in the car for a while, knows that it tastes like shit.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
there's something about like fresh spring water. But then I started wondering, well, why is it that purified spring water does seem to be like sometimes, like what is it about spring water that's good for you? And, the reason why, so basically you use the multi-pure filtration and you use like your own natural action technology to basically filter the water and then to vortex the water. And when you explained to me this once on the phone before, it all made sense. But can you like explain this for like the layman? How this works? Like how is water enlivened by movement?
Movement's like the foundational piece, and then what it's moving around, over,
Like
inside of
rocks.
is another piece. So the atoms all have vibrations, and
Yeah.
water has a definable life cycle,
Mm-hmm.
scientifically repeatable.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll see water exposed to sunlight, and deep bore water is round structures, very simple structures. In the middle of the mountain stream, the structures look like leaves or vegetation, and
Wow.
you let the drop evaporate under a microscope, and basically water is the mold for how the crystal grows when it evaporates. And mechanically moved water
Oh.
has square patterns in it, and that water is considered dormant or dead. And spring water, mature spring water,
Oh,
has
that's like most people's pipes, right?
100%. That's the
Yeah.
primary killer, is moving it under pressure or stress in an unnatural form, which is a straight pipe.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So basically, we've been moving water inappropriately throughout these cities. And like, it's funny because if you look at like ancient Rome, they would create these water structures that were like lifted above ground to like enable water to be pumped in different directions. But, I'm curious, when do you think this began? Like, when did humans start screwing this up?
Industrial revolution and the lack of quality and respect for sacred elements. Just move this commodity from A to B and move
Mm,
it as quick as possible, and as efficient as possible. But in the
yeah.
end, the holistic journey of it is not efficient at all, because it becomes like it's worse than
Yeah.
pond water in a way, because it's sterilized also. At least pond water is a birthplace for
Mm-hmm.
the cycle of nature, but we wouldn't drink that water. So we're really
Yeah.
referring to the health of the planet and people and everything in between, and more or less how that has a foundational effect on how life it forms. And so you could have an
Yeah.
infinite amount of different waters that form life in a different way. When you look at algae, you can control the color of the algae by the frequency of the water, the standing wave pattern in it. And so if you stress the water out, it'll
Yeah.
tend to force over to red algae. If the water is healthy, it'll form blue-green algae.
Oh,
And so you're starting to see a pattern of the animal
interesting.
plant because they don't know with algae, right? It behaves, it does a CO2 oxygen switch like yeast. There's part of the time it behaves like a plant, and the other part of the time it behaves like an animal. And so it sets up the beginnings
Wow.
of life. And there's so much evidence that's probably beyond, this topic that reinforces all the inklings that I felt when I was studying the water that it's alive. And I only made progress in my industrial success there. When I treated it like it
Yeah.
was living, and I learned from it incrementally, and I taught it incrementally to do what I needed it to do. And then everything started to work.
Wow. It's funny because my friends are health nuts um and I do think that the one thing that has probably made one of the biggest differences in my health this year was this water. So
Excellent.
what are the elements in the Vortex, device that attaches to the filtration system?
We have a wide band of trace elements similar to what you'd find in the ocean.
Oh, I
And
see.
and that actually doesn't come from the ocean. It comes from the shungite on the North Pole. That's
Wow.
one of the primary. So everything balances with a male and a female in the simplest
Yeah.
sense. And so we use an ancient quartz and a shungite, and the shungite's very like earthing. It's a high form of carbon, and a
Hmm.
decadence or a
Hmm.
series of different allotropes of carbon that
Okay.
nature made for millions to billions of years on the North Pole. And
Cool.
it's very unique because you're on the North Pole. The geomagnetic field is not the same up there as it is everywhere else. So basically, we make our own crystal out of it, and we shape it into spheres. Water and carbon have a huge relationship together. And if you really look at water when
Yeah.
it forms structure, it simulates carbon in its structuring group. So you take 6 hydrogens, and that equals 12, and that's carbon. And so that's kind of the basis of it, a very earthing, clear,
Yeah.
transformational energy. And then the quartz is more or less what you consider maybe an amplifier to that. And it does about half of the effect we can measure. So the motion does about half of the change in the water. And then it synergizes with the material,
Hmm.
especially if the water's moving around it in a double vortex. It's not a single vortex like a lot of people are thinking when we say vortex.
Oh, so like a double helix kind of.
Yes, correct. And what
Cool.
happens when you separate water, it charges up. All ions charge up when you separate them. And when you pull
Oh,
those apart or dilute it, the
yep.
charges go up trying to get back together. And so water does it itself. So
Oh, wow.
when water meets a rock in the river, more hydrogen goes to one side and more free oxygen goes to the other side, and then they're rewound together on the backside, and you have a new refreshed water. So we do that repeatedly, like our whole home system.
Polarity.
Yeah, polarity and separation, but not full separation, not aggressive separation. That would be technical. And water wants to be together more than anything. So
Yeah,
when the water is refreshed, it's
sure.
more capable of communicating with its environment. So then it reads what it's flowing over more effectively and matures. So when you look at the life cycle of water, when it's juvenile, it's kind of immature, aggressive. It grabs minerals without discern. And there's different ways to mature it. But the mature water comes from deep earth. So it's kept in the dark and birthed in the earth and rises up, and it's actually born in the earth, like it's born in the mitochondria, like it's born in the human body along the spine. There's all these different versions that are verifiable, and more or less in the mountain stream is where it meets biology for the first time at high altitude.
Yeah.
All the bacterias that are healthy and viruses, and most viruses are healthy. There's some of them that are not, obviously, and that's so. In the end, water has this journey. So about the middle of the mountain stream is where mountain people around the world knew. In the middle of the mountain, that's where the water was most medicinal, most healing, most energetic. And so
Wow.
the idea behind flow form is what they call it, or natural ionization, is to mature the water over whatever state it was, but first correct the condition that's stuck in the water, which is stress.
Yeah.
It's an identifiable stress pattern that shows up in the crystal analysis under the microscope, and that can be
Oh my
very
gosh.
it takes a long time to embed that inertia into water, and it takes
Yeah.
very little time to undo it. And that's a beautiful gift to the nature and the universe
Wow.
for sure.
I mean, this is so interesting because there's so much analogous. It's so interesting how many analogous patterns are found in different levels of life and different forms of life. This whole sort of maturity and medicinal qualities of water, and then the analogies to the human life cycle. So it's really fascinating stuff. Um, and so, when I guess before we go on to the book, 'cause like a big segue to the book would be like, how is there a reason why is this water more structured, and is more structured water better for mitochondria, or is this just a fad?
I don't like the word structure because I can structure water and make it rigid. And
Yeah.
and what I have come to the conclusion of is that part of the definition of the planetary health, human health, and water
Yeah.
is its ability to adapt, to learn and adapt. And so you can create a very advanced structured, like this is what I did in industry. And I had it tested with numerous naturopaths. And one of this water I was making in industry, I saw the water changing. The best naturopaths I knew said it was too much energy in the water and it was pinned. It didn't have it was programmed to do a certain thing that we're doing with it. And I was
Mm,
trying to maximize that always. But there's a
yeah.
foundation to all that in all those fields that I constantly see human beings stepping over and trying to do details over the top of a bad foundation. And so
Mm,
water being a big foundation of biology, to me, it was like, and so I
yeah.
started studying everything: soil, growing crops, the human body, even mitochondria. And so I was reading about Dr. Krebs and the Krebs cycle
Oh my gosh.
and the ATP conversion, right? And they said that he discovered that the actual energy, and this is what Victor Schauberger said, is increased by the cold integrated process, not by the burning process. So Dr. Krebs basically said that the burning of the carbohydrate is only to keep the temperature correct so the rest of the process can work within the cell, but the energy comes from the proton left over at the end of the ETC chain that recombines with an oxygen and gives birth to water, brand new
Yeah.
water within the cell. And that water is hungry for information and for material. And so it works inside of the cell different from the water outside of the blood plasma. And those two make a polarity. And one's an incubator for life and growth, and the other one is kind of like the guide for how the terrain, right, that cell is going to get its instruction from, and how
Wow.
evolution of DNA, epigenetics, and RNA. And NASA just admitted that water must be the RNA, and that's how life must start in space. They came out and said that in an
What?
article. Yeah, yeah. About a couple months ago, we did a blog on it. But yeah,
So I got really interested in mitochondria because to me, it made sense that basically like the early life engulfed bacteria, potentially the endosymbiotic hypothesis, what are your thoughts on that endosymbiotic hypothesis and like the engulfment of bacteria in these single celled organisms to harvest more energy to create more complexity?
I mean, I don't think I'm qualified to answer that articulately, but I would go back to, it's an evolution out of the terrain that the water reads and feeds and starts building this. And since we already have a lot of matter now, and water never wants to be, there's like even rainwater has stuff in it. There's no such thing as pure water. Water wants to assimilate everything and harmonize it so it
Mm.
kind of gets along for the purpose of harmony. That's what I observed when I said the vibrations are mutating, right?
Ah,
The
yeah.
RNA inside the algae is the water. And really cool is the human pregnancy process and how that relates to cancer.
Well, it's
And
funny. Dr. Joseph Gonzalez wrote a lot about this. And I think he did write about this, like, and I never really saw it that way because I didn't really understand what he was meaning by all of this. But that's exactly what he wrote about. And yet I never really understood how he got to the conclusion, but that makes a lot of sense.
it's actually for women, which is who I think inspired Reif to build the microscopes to prove this out in greater detail, to get down deeper, because there's spores involved in this. And spores sometimes so small that you can't see it. And there's even bacillus that if you kill the bacillus, it drops a spore and then hatches 1,000 seeds of itself. So
Mm.
Rife actually documented this very articulately, but it was 4 women in independent research that all discovered a form of tuberculosis bacillus that went on. So once this is normal in your body, we all have this, but when the immune system is told to shut off, this whole thing goes rampant, and these T bacillus are part of the process that secretes the hormone to tell the body to lay off. So it's not that the immune system is malfunctioning. Somebody along the way, or it evolved to trick the immune system into almost thinking that the host is pregnant, whether
Mm.
male or female. This hormone starts to show up. And so it
Yeah.
was 4 women who did deep research. You don't have to study a Bible of medicine to understand any of this stuff. And then modern day verification. So I don't do that research myself. It's not my professional field, but I work closely with people who do the research, who study really how to tame this whole thing that's going on, where the solution is to stop the critter that continues to secrete the hormone, which is considered to be a mutating intelligent. And what I've learned in soil study and body study is that these critters, when they work in unison, whether they're algae, viruses is going to, I think, become more like an enzyme in the end, not
Wow.
protein enzyme, polypeptide. And when they start working in groups together,
Wow.
I might be, a little bit ahead there, but that's just my take and my studies. And so in the end of that whole cycle, it's the pleomorphic adaptive state. And when it gets out of control and the water body is breathing pathogens with its inertia rather than, so in other words, the seeds are neutral is what Baysham said, and the terrain decides what the spore grows into, whether it's a pathogen or whether it's a symbiote in the living sense.
So the sort of the environment we're in kind of determines our health.
That given, and water and proteins have this huge relationship of instruction to form life. DNA, RNA,
cool.
Different types of that, right? That's complicated for me. I stick to the very simple that, oh, cool. Water's giving the instruction based on what it reads from the terrain of how to bring something up and adapt to it. So the end message for me is
so cool.
If the water is alive and adaptive and you're giving people a condensed guidance on how to do all that, I think water is a great foundation for that. And living water is what we need to look at and try and inspire ourselves with. But then you need to build off of that. A lot of people have plagued this water with being a cure. And it's not so much a cure as it is a foundational piece. It is the terrain model. It's not a terrain theory anymore. And that was proven in the late 1700s. So super cool journey for me.
Well, that's fascinating.
And super cool to see people like you come from, conventional teachings and evolve and become like Bruce Lee and learn everything from every teaching and bring it together. That's what I always tell people is Bruce Lee didn't invent anything. He took the best pieces that worked for him out of all the martial arts and made a new one called,
I love that.
Synchronize everybody and use what works for you. And I think that's what you're doing with your book.
Yeah. Really, that's what I'm trying to do is like, first, I mean, the book is just like, it's funny because I kind of regretted writing it just for women because I realized I could have offered it to a much bigger audience. But my editors were like very interested in the biohacking angle. They're like, well, there's already these biohacking books, so might as well write one. But I think if I would have redone the book, I would have written it for men and women and just had a chapter on men and a chapter on women. But it's really a good book for everybody to read because not all of it is applicable to women. Some of it's applicable to both genders. Mm-hmm. But, basically it's a book on mitochondrial health and understanding how important metabolism is to optimal health. And if you don't get the basics right, all these bells and whistles that you have, all these biohacking tools, they don't really matter as much as getting the simplest things correct. So I do really try to hammer home that like monitoring your sleep, stress, movement, and glucose is something that can make a huge difference in your health. But you also got to get your air quality clean, your water optimized, get your basic supplements in, and also make sure you live in a healthy environment, and then you have healthy relationships. So it's kind of like an overall overarching book on health and biohacking. And the next book might be a little bit more, I don't know. I think the next book will probably be on love and relationships and the power of and like, I guess maybe like the power of love, but the risks of love as well. Like I've been studying a lot about like what is love, and it really is this motivational force. I think that we evolved to bring people together, to create proximity, to enhance the chances of sharing information, resources, and improving your chances of reproduction, and also ensuring survival of your tribe and yourself. And so I look at love very, very differently than like, the people writing Disney movies. It's literally about understanding its role in our evolution. And to
Oh, I
me,
love it.
it's just fascinating stuff, like how